Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to our ICER, Institute for Civically Engaged Research, Roundtable on the status of civically engaged research in the profession. I'm Valeria Sinclair-Chapman for our audience at home. The people in this room have been working with us all week. So hi, ICER Fellows, thank you. So this is our amazing cohort of ICER Fellows for the 2023 year. And so we will, in this room, we've been thinking about the kinds of conversations and questions we're gonna have today all week. And so we are looking forward to having a robust and engaging discussion. I won't take a lot of time. Again, I'm Valeria Sinclair-Chapman. I'm one of the co-directors, and here is Dr. Peter Levine from Tufts. He is our other co-director here. At some point, you get to say hello to Sean Delahunty, who is the director of the Centennial Center at the American Political Science Association. We want to thank the American Political Science Association and Tisch College and Tufts University for their support of this effort. And we want to invite the folks that are tuning in virtually as well to ask questions. We're going to use the chat in order to do that. And so please feel free to kind of contribute your questions or comments to the chat as we go. I don't want to take a lot of time. I'm going to give our panelists some heads up. I'm going to say your names, but I'm going to ask you to say a little bit about yourselves as we get started. Let me give you just a little bit of background on what we here at the Institute for Civically Engaged Research are aiming to do. The ICER was founded in 2018, 2019 with a generous grant from I don't remember the name of the foundation. Ivywood, thank you. A generous grant from the Ivywood Foundation. So perhaps Rob can talk a little bit about that. So forgive me, Roger Smith, who was the kind of spearheaded that effort. And so we had our first institute in 2019, and then lo and behold, the pandemic came and interrupted us. And we have persisted through that time period. Civically engaged research is important to the discipline. It's important kind of work that we in the discipline are trying to bring forward in awareness. Many of us are already doing that work, but it's not, we are trying to find spaces in the discipline to recognize the rigor and the contributions that this work can bring to our scholarship. And so that is part of the efforts that we have here. I don't want to belabor this, so some of that will come out in conversation with our panelists. So I'm going to say your names, and then I'm actually going to jump into some Q&A. So on our panel, we have Rob Lieberman, Melissa Michelson, Ethel Tungohan, Adriano Udani, and Lauren Bell. And as I ask questions, I'm going to ask that you just say a little bit about yourselves, and then we go into your answers. So I think we're going to go in that order. And I'm going to start with our first question, just a really basic kind of question, and that is, what is civically engaged research to you, for each of you? And if you can, before you answer, just kind of give us a sense of who you are in your background. Some of us do work in civically engaged research. Some of us are supporters of why it's important. Rob, I'm going to start with you, and you have been part of this from the very beginning, from its inception. So thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Valeria, and thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm Robert Lieberman, as Valeria said. I teach political science, mostly American politics at Johns Hopkins. And I myself don't think of myself as a civically engaged researcher. I study American political development, so I mostly study dead people. But as Valeria said, I've been involved in this effort from the very beginning when Roger Smith, and I know those of you who are ICER fellows, I think already heard from Rogers earlier this week, but when Rogers became president of the association in 2017, he asked me to chair his presidential task force, which true to form, Rogers took a good idea, the presidential task force, and made it a better one. That is, most presidents of APSA who had done these task forces had convened a group of people to study a problem or an issue, inequality or political parties. The John Espiama's task force report on political parties just came out. It's a great piece of work. But what Rogers wanted to do was to think about the ways in which the discipline of political science could be more than it was, could be more engaged with the world, could focus its attention more on real world connections and real world problems, rather than sort of retreating into this kind of narrow scholastic world in which a lot of us, certainly of my generation, were trained. And the goal of the task force is really to sort of nudge the discipline away from this approach and to think more about how we could, as a discipline, as a group, as a community, focus our knowledge and our specialties and our engagement on real problems that affect communities. Now, this is something that political science had always done. You know, there was this sort of artificial distinction, I think, that for many decades, scholars in political science made between science, quote unquote, and values. I'm just very quickly, if you don't mind, going to read one quotation from, this is Robert Dahl in 1961, sort of leading the charge for behavioralism in the post-World War II era of the discipline. Dahl said the following, quote, "The empirical political scientist is concerned with what is and not with what ought to be. The behaviorally minded student of politics is prepared to describe values as empirical data, but qua scientist," the quotation marks are his, "he seeks to avoid prescription or inquiry into the grounds on which judgments of value can properly be made." This is exactly, you know, Dahl was a great figure in the discipline, but this was exactly the approach to political science that we on the task force were trying to push against. And one of the ways we hoped to do this was to promote the value of civically engaged research, of research that is conducted with, alongside, in partnership with communities, rather than just about reaching into communities and observing them as if they're laboratory animals or something like that. And so community, the task force's work rested on really on three pillars: education, or teaching, research, and civic engagement. And we did a number of, we seeded with this very generous grant from the Ivywood Foundation, we were able to seed a number of programs in civic engagement, including the APSA Distinguished Association Award in for civically engaged research, which is given annually. And most pertinently for us today, ICER, as a way of, you know, modeling for young scholars, for graduate students, for young assistant professors, and for a whole range of people, the idea that this kind of work has value, that you can do this kind of work without sacrificing rigor, without sacrificing analytical clarity, but in a way that is really closely connected to communities and the challenges that communities face. Again, this is something that I think political science has always done. But the value of this kind of work and this kind of engagement, I think, had receded a little bit. And the hope is that with communities like ICER and with activities like the Institute, that we'll be able to sort of recapture some of that and you know, promote the value of this kind of work in the discipline. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Rob. I appreciate that. All right, if we can have Melissa, good to see you. So yeah, Melissa, if you can answer the question about civically engaged research, what is it?
Okay, well, say hi. I'm Melissa Michelson. I'm the scientist and also
Having a little bit of trouble with the
still get to
connection.
teach. And for me, it's engaged.
Hold on 1 second. We're having a little bit of a problem.
I don't know what's wrong.
Let's see.
Turn off Chrome or.
On her end?
Yeah, on her end. Turn off all the internet.
Okay.
Stuff.
This
Turn off all the things.
Yeah, that's what.
Turn off the Chrome stuff.
Yeah.
I was a senior TA for remote teaching in grad school. So.
Oh, okay. Now we know the answer, the secret sauce.
There you go.
Okay. Is that better?
Yeah, much
Turn
better.
off all the things. Wow.
Crowdsourcing. All right.
I already learned something really important today, so I'm so glad I showed up. All right, so I'm Melissa Michelson. I'm a political scientist. I'm also the Dean of Arts and Sciences at Menlo College, but I'm still teaching and I'm still doing research and I'm still doing a lot of civically engaged research. And that means a couple of things to me. One thing it means is obviously engaging with the community and engaging with organizations, with political actors. And I've done that throughout my career, whether that's with my LGBTQ politics research, cooperating with LGBTQ advocacy organizations to make sure that the work I'm doing answers the questions they have and advances equity and inclusion for the LGBTQ community, or work I do with registrars of voting and people who work in elections offices, where we're trying to help make election worker training more efficient or election administration more efficient to make sure that democracy is strong. And those things I think are appealing to hopefully all of us in terms of we want people to be treated equitably. We want justice. We want everyone to be able to vote and all of those things. But the second thing it means to me that I think is also important is recognizing the wisdom and the value of those community partners and what that brings to academics. Because, you know, I can read all of the books and I can do all the interviews and I can think I understand what it means to run an election. But if I'm not partnering with the local registrar, if I'm not actually including election administrators as holders of wisdom, then I can't do the research in the best way because I'm not joining that wisdom and knowledge to the project and bringing them in as community scholars. When I'm talking to leaders of advocacy organizations or community organizations that are doing the work, that are out there doing the work every day, they're the ones with the knowledge that I can't get at the library, or I guess on the internet, because no one goes to the library anymore, right? So to me, civically engaged research means both doing work that is promoting the health of our civic democracy and in a way being a scholar activist, but it's also recognizing the wisdom of our community partners and bringing them in as partners and not just sources of information from whom I am extracting value to promote my career.
Thank you for that, Melissa. And it fits right in with other conversations that we've had here. So that's perfect. And we can add to that as our conversation goes. Ethel, I think that you are up next. Ethel has actually been here and participated in ICER as a visitor in the past. So it's good to see you. Thank you, Melissa.
Hi, everyone. I'm so thrilled to have been invited, and looking at the video of the room, I see colorful Post-it notes. So I remember when I was there last year, and I have, to be honest, a little bit of FOMO because it seems as though looking at the Post-it notes that I can see at the side of the screen, y'all talked a lot about civically engaged research and the stuff that we're interested in addressing. So a little bit about me. I have the immense privilege of actually having the title of being a Canada Research Chair in socially engaged research, right? So part of my mandate as a professor is to actually advance civically, politically, and socially engaged research. And we can parse out what the differences between those approaches mean. But suffice it to say that in terms of my own work, I see the use of participatory methodologies as being central to my own work and also to my own kind of normative approach to politics, right? When it comes to socially, civically, and politically engaged research, I use decolonial methodologies, which basically asks the communities that I work with what projects and what research questions are of relevance to them. So my own work looks a lot at migrant worker movements. I'm an immigration scholar as well as a social movement scholar. And these types of participatory methodologies, when I started my PhD in 2006 at the University of Toronto in the Department of Political Science, was not something political scientists talked about, right? But thankfully, and quite honestly, it was only through my affiliation with gender and women's studies that the project I wanted to do, which is to look at migrant domestic workers' social movement, that became something that I could do, right? So I just want to identify that political scientists as a whole tend to see participatory methodologies as kind of kooky, at least when I started. They're like, what do you want to do? Wait, what? Like, what's your independent variable? And I'm like, I'm not interested in that. And as a plug, because of that, I'm able, so these are this is the cover for my book, which has actually been released. I was able to actually write a book, and I'm going to put that into the chat as a bit of self-promotion, if I can, that actually looks at migrant domestic workers' movements from the perspectives of movements themselves. And with that, what that means is that I engage deeply with migrant domestic worker organizations to make sure that the questions I ask were relevant to their concerns, right? Some of the pushback I received from folks was, well, aren't you being too close to the people that you're studying, right? How do you know that the migrant workers that you're working with, that they're telling the truth? Is this a robust sample? Mm-hmm. The questions I was asking I wasn't interested in ascertaining the successes and failures of movements, right? I was interested in putting at the center migrant domestic worker organizations' own perspectives as to what constitutes community and activist success. And so I'll just end with a few notes, right? Like first, in my work with migrant justice communities and in my engagements as a social movement scholar, one thing that movement activists have noted is that us academics tend to promote research as a mode of extraction, right? So one question that a lot of migrant justice organizations that I work with, as well as Indigenous justice organizations, ask us to do as academics is to ask, are we the right people to be doing this work, right? Is this research something that needs to be done now? And what are the harms that emerge from potentially disclosing the results of our research? So there is a consortium of Global South academics called the South-South Network, and they invited me to talk. And one of their initiatives is actually to put in Global South thinkers, but also this idea of the right not to research, right? Which is anathema to how we've been taught as political scientists. And it's something that I've been thinking a lot as well, because what has been engaging to me is reading the works of Indigenous thinkers such as Eve Tuck, who always asks, what right do you have to know? So I'll just end with these questions. And so for me, socially, politically, and civically engaged research really puts at the center community needs and priorities, sometimes over and above academic needs and priorities. Thank you so much.
Ethel, thank you. And I just want to say, we're not going to call this self-promotion. We are in the midst of building a kind of bibliography on Google, thanks to several in the room, particularly Rachel, who can raise her hand. So please, if you have some material that folks need to pay attention to, Ethel, including the link that you've already put in, but the material related to the other couple of scholars that you mentioned, please put it in the chat and we will access it. So thank you for that. All right, Adriano, big shoes to follow here. Udani, so Adriano, we know really well. He's from our very first cohort of ICER fellows. And he has been phenomenal in his work. And some of you know him in the room already, so we wish you were here, as we wish everyone was, but we're happy to see you. Adriano, can you talk a little bit about civically engaged research, what it means to you, maybe even what you've done, so we can get a sense of that.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. It's great to see some familiar faces from my angle. As Ethel said, FOMO is real. I wish I was there. This time of year has been just a wonderful time for just energizing back and talking about civic engaged research, as well as like learning about what other people are doing. So thanks again for allowing me to be part of this panel. I'm an associate professor of political science at the University of Missouri, St. Louis. I also direct the public policy administration program here and also serve as the research advisor for the Community Innovation and Action Center, which is the public-facing center of the university that focuses on different modes and models of civic engagement for partnerships in our region. Currently, I am researching the expansion of the deportation system that has normalized electronic surveillance, which includes ankle monitors and smartphone apps as part of the asylum process. And so, as Valeria mentioned, I was part of the inaugural cohort of ICER, and I took this project that I didn't really know what to do with, but I knew that there was interest with friends and connections in the immigration service ecosystem here in St. Louis. But following ICER, I helped co-design a mutual support group for asylum seekers from Latin America. I think it was an important space since many asylum seekers are often conflated or mixed up with undocumented immigrants or refugees. And many of them are really socialized to be service consumers rather than critical thinkers or movement leaders in their own respects. And that in political science, and I think I would argue elsewhere, that's how we study them. We only study them as consumers or storytellers, and we haven't really constructed an identity of them as critical thinkers or people with agency or movement leaders. So the group to date has grown to 64 people. We started with a group of about 12. And so being in conversation with one another has fueled actual political behavior, such as participating and organizing protests. We just recently protested against BI Incorporated, which is ICE's private contractor. Following a lot of our mutual support groups, asylum seekers have self-advocated to remove their ankle monitors themselves. They are in conversation and meeting with Congresswoman Cori Bush to force ICE contractors to return their passports that have been taken away from them. And so currently, our mutual support group has just been gathering data, again, on the mental and physical health impact of digital surveillance. And we've teamed up with physicians at Washington Med School, service providers, and also attorneys to conduct forensic exams to document the effects of past and current trauma. And so this evidence will be used to help their asylum case. So I say all this to try to influence a discussion of what CER is to me. I think a big part of CER for me is co-creating an approach that addresses a social problem that exists beyond the literature and beyond what we think is important in political science and other kindred disciplines, is what Melissa was talking about. Particularly where solutions and recommendations are relevant and impactful, at least for, I can only speak for St. Louis, but I would also argue elsewhere. A lot of the findings and a lot of the outcomes of studies never go back to Spanish-speaking populations. In fact, a lot of the results aren't often provided back to them, where they can deliberate, they can critically think about what's being said of them. And so in thinking about how data and results are translated back to people who are disproportionately impacted by the policies that affect them is an important part of CER. I think also of creating methods and findings that are more accessible than the models, than some of the more very rigorous ways in which we analyze data. So we've tried to think of other ways that would engage participation and also creativity. Later on, I'll talk about some of these methods if anyone's interested. But I think at the end of the day too, and I thank Valeria and Peter and my cohortions and others who ICER have brought in. I really think that it's also a way of thinking about social inquiry as a way to check my own privileges and identities that I bring to projects, as well as decentering academic researchers in trying to focus in on that relevant and impactful project. So thanks again for your time.
Thank you, Adriano. And so now we're going to turn to Dr. Lauren Bell. And Lauren does work in legislative studies as part of her scholarship, so we're connected in that way. But Lauren, you also have helped to found a new group in the Political Science Association related to civically engaged research. So maybe you can address that as well. But yes, talk to us about what your view is of civically engaged research.
Sure. Well, hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. As Valeria said, I'm Lauren Bell. I teach political science at Randolph-Macon College. We are a small private liberal arts college in Ashland, Virginia. We're about 15 miles north of Richmond, which is the state capital, and about 100 miles south of Washington, D.C. So we're in a really great spot as far as civically engaged research and activity goes. I've been here since 1999, but I spent 2007 to 2022 in the Provost's office, first as Associate Dean and then Dean of Academic Affairs. My bosses during that time frame were a mathematician and a physicist. So I became the principal point person on pretty much any question of social science related research, community engaged research for our entire campus. So I suspect one of the things that I can bring to this conversation, although Melissa certainly can too in her role, is to talk about the ways in which institutions either do or do not support this work, and ways in which perhaps to get this more on an institutional radar, because I know that that's a challenge in many instances. As Valeria mentioned, I'm currently the co-chair of the APSA Civic Engagement section. To the extent that I was involved in the founding, that would be only in that I volunteered. Really, the founders were Elizabeth Benyon, and I'm blanking on Richard's last name. They were the ones that essentially said, you know, look, the section, we need a section within APSA that will promote civically engaged research and civic engagement pedagogy. And as soon as the call went out for people interested in participating, I jumped in. And so I've been involved for the last several years on a number of committees, and then ultimately now I'm serving as co-chair. You know, I think really what our section has identified, and Valeria alluded to this in some of her introductory remarks, is the real challenge within the discipline of finding the right places for this work, and to demonstrate that this work is legitimate, that it is rigorous, and that it has impact. And you know, that speaks to me to my own definitions of civically engaged research. That's where we as political scientists or social scientists more broadly, you know, it's the nexus of our skills and our training with solving problems or supporting our communities. I would also say that I'm at an undergraduate only institution. It's also, I think, where we can get our students most connected to the work of political science and to understanding really how governments work. You know, I teach research methods, right? We can go down the list of quantitative skills that our students need. That doesn't engage them. Where they get engaged is meeting members of the community, is learning about what problems those community members have identified, and feeling like they can be part of the solution to those things. That promotes their own efficacy. It gets back to Melissa's point about promoting democracy and civic engagement at a time when certainly we could all use some of that in productive ways. So to me, I see civic engagement research as, again, that nexus of our our skills with supporting our communities, but also as a pathway for many of our students into the work that can be done through our discipline and to support civic life. So I'll stop there for now.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you for all of our panelists for your comments. I want to just kind of echo some of the things that we've heard so far. I'm only going to ask one more question because I want to open it up to the floor. But you know, we've talked a little bit about civically engaged research as or CER as a methodological approach, as a way to create or understand concepts and theories, as a rigorous approach to understanding and testing the kinds of assumptions that we make or draw from other kinds of methodological approaches. So perhaps we're doing work with quantitative work, with surveys or experiments, but do we know what's really happening on the ground, how it matters, whether it's even working the way that we imagine that it does? This is the kind of rigor that civically engaged research can bring. We also know that civically engaged research can help us to expand our research agendas, right? And to, so not only to test new questions or uncover new answers, but to also expand our research agendas. There are things that we can know from civically engaged research that we can't know in any other way. And so these are some of the considerations that I think that we bring to the table. Civically engaged research also brings questions about agenda setting and the relevance of political science more generally, not only to students, but to the academy, to legislators, to policymakers, and to funders. And so I think if we're going to be thinking about mixed methods, then civically engaged research should be part of our toolkit, and we need to be thinking about training. So your point about pedagogy is right there, and I think it fits right in this room. We also need to be considering questions about publication. Where do we publish? How does this fit into our professional trajectories? How do departments receive this work? How do universities kind of evaluate this kind of work? So I'm going to invite our panelists to kind of address some of that question. How is civically engaged research received in the discipline or in our departments? What do we need to be thinking about with promotion, tenure, publication, stage in our careers? So I'm going to invite you all to contribute, but I'm going to let you volunteer this time. So is there anybody who wants to kind of jump in on any of that?
I'll start because I am still on the screen as I can see myself, and also right, which is really weird. It's very meta. I'm like here and there and there. But I have a lot of thoughts about this from an institutional perspective. You know, the quick answer is I hope that civically engaged research is gaining more traction and more acceptance within the discipline. But I think it still has a long way to go. I think what I would also say, and sort of, I want to be quick about this. I think it also depends on the type of institution and the nature of the department that you're in. I am very fortunate to be at an institution where professional activity is required. In my own department, publication, yes, but institutionally, there's support for a huge amount of activity. It's again, we are a small private liberal arts college, and faculty are really rewarded for creative approaches, for community-based approaches. You know, I'm lucky to be at a place like this. I've been here for 25 years. Not everybody has that opportunity. And so, you know, I think at one level, you do what you need to do to continue in your role. Ideally, if you're in a tenure track position, once you're tenured, then you do what makes you happy and what you have more flexibility to do. I mean, I would never advise someone who's in a contingent position to do this kind of work if it is not valued in their department. And what makes me sad about that is because we don't have a broader discipline-wide commitment to it yet, I'm putting in the caveat of yet, I think that advice has to be paramount, right? You have to do what is rewarded in your department before you can do this work if this isn't it. Institutionally, I think, again, it's going to depend on the nature of the institution. For me, when I was in the dean's office, the kinds of things that led me to be more or less supportive had to do, honestly, it's liability issues, right? So it's questions of, if you are working with a community that is not so local that everyone can walk there, how are you getting your students there, right? Is the work that you're doing required for them? For faculty doing their own research, is the work that they're doing going to leave the institution vulnerable in any way? Are the faculty conforming to IRB requirements? And to what extent are we facilitating that work through training our IRB appropriately? So institutionally, I think you have to think about liability. You have to think about funding. Obviously, some institutions are better at that than others. You have to think about, again, IRB. I think there has been progress. I will put a plug in here real quick. Also, if you are not a member yet of the APSA Civic Engagement section, I encourage you to join. It's super cheap. We are exploring opportunities for new publication venues. We have an active subgroup working on the potential for a new journal. We've had some meetings with publishers. One challenge has to do with whether there would be sufficient submissions, to be honest. And so as this community expands, I think the likelihood of that kind of thing, of being able to found a new journal that would be focused on civically engaged research, becomes more real. So these are the kinds of things that we've been working on, and we talk about monthly when we meet as an executive committee. So I'd encourage you to get involved, to think about that, to think about how useful a new journal might be and what form it might take. And yeah, I'll quit there.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Lauren. Maybe we can get one more person if you have an answer to that. Probably not everybody, because I want to leave room for some other folks. Anybody have a burning response?
I can jump in with a couple things on this, Valeria.
And I saw on the list of two, so let's be brief so we can get
I'll try to be quick. So first of all, I echo everything that Lauren just said about the institutional challenges here. And I'm speaking now not just as a faculty member, but as someone who spent some years in university administration at a major R1 institution. And this is a broad challenge in higher ed. So, engineers are worried about how to count things like patents in tenure and promotion cases. Things that 10, 20 years ago would not have counted because they're not peer-reviewed publications. So we're not alone in trying to grapple with the challenge of how to evaluate people who are doing a wide variety of different things. But I'd say a couple of things that are really important. One is just echoing things that other panelists have said, and that is the idea that that civically engaged research can be as rigorous and as knowledge producing as anything else that we do in political science. So there's not a trade-off between rigor and engagement, right? We're asking, people who do civically engaged research are asking a set of questions with a set of tools that are refined and carefully calibrated to answer those questions. And as Valeria, I think, has said a few minutes ago, you're asking and answering questions that you can't ask and answer in any other way. So I think underscoring that is really important. The last thing I'll say is that one of the things that's really important is that there's a widening and growing community of people in the discipline who are doing this. So that, you ICER fellows, former ICER fellows, and fellow travelers are the community. of civically engaged researchers. You're the people who will be reviewing each other's publications for journals and book publishers, who will be doing tenure evaluations for each other. So I think growing the community is a really important piece of the puzzle, in a way of sort of helping to raise the profile of this kind of work inside the discipline and in our institution.
Okay, thank you. Melissa, you wanted to say something briefly.
Yeah, I just want to briefly throw out there that a lot of the work that we do in communities can be good for the mission of the institution. And one way to maybe push back against resistance that you're getting from your department or your university is to put it in their jargon. When you're doing civically engaged work and you're involving students, you're engaging in experiential learning. When you're making connections with Hispanic serving organizations in the community, you're serving the HSI mission of your institution, you're improving town-gown relations, you're bringing good PR. And so if you're trying to convince somebody that your civically engaged research is legitimate and good for the university, sometimes it's all about using their language in the way that you're describing it. That's what the deans and the provosts and the presidents are going to want to see.
Thank you for that. I want to give Adriano and Ethel like a couple of minutes to say some other things, and then we're going to open up the floor to a question or two from the room and one or two questions from the chat. All right.
Sure.
Yeah, why don't we go with you, Adriano?
Sounds good. Thanks. Just one thing that I wanted to pick up on what Lauren was also saying was just the sort of practical way in which research happens with civically engaged research. So we've talked a lot about affirming the role of grounded knowledge here, but one thing that you have to think about also is how do we actually compensate our partners and also recognize them as authors? And so we were fortunate enough to pay for the time and skills that our asylum seeker partners offered. But it was a real big struggle and challenge to work with IRB, as Lauren said, to really think of them not as subjects or one of those IRB categories. We were saying that they are co-PIs, they are consultants, and we're going to pay them as such. So, trying to position and construct the groups that you care about really matters down to the IRB as well as the research proposal, and also how you execute a project. The last thing that I want to say is one of the most rewarding and also energizing things that we did as an ICER cohort, and I think what Doug Hess put this up here, was we decided as a cohort to engage in an initiative to try to start some traction on scholarship related to civically engaged research. So myself and others led writing a PS symposium, and we also have a dialogues piece at PGI that's under review right now. So I would encourage this cohort to try to get together to figure out how to create a collective project to keep the ball moving forward. And then also to try to figure out how do we build bridges between cohorts. We've been able to do that in past cohorts, and we were unable to do that this year. But I think there is support from the Centennial Center, thanks to Sean, that we can start building these bridges across cohorts to do and execute what Rob was talking about, was institution building.
All right, wonderful, thank you. Thank you for that, Adriana, lots there. And Ethel, and then we're going to open it to the floor.
Yeah, one venue that's actually been pretty receptive to kind of looking at and publishing work using engaged methodologies has been public policy journals. So I've put in the chat a co-written, co-authored piece that myself and a bunch of folks who use engaged methodologies publish at Policy and Politics. I've put that there. Another thing that I want to kind of flag is the time and tempo of community work doesn't square and oftentimes contradicts academic imperatives to publish and perish, right? And so sometimes there's pressures that we face to publish results that the community's not ready to release yet, or that are quite frankly still not, they're still not as rigorous, right? And this stems from kind of this decolonial imperative to make sure that, you know, we really need to stop and pause and think, if we publish this work, what are then the implications for the communities under study, right? Because one of the things that we're kind of addressing here in Canada is we don't want to pathologize communities in disclosing results where we don't actually look at kind of the larger implications as well. And I can cite examples later if people want, but I just kind of wanted to sound that as a note of caution. So one thing that my partners and I have done is to actually disclose and publish methodological, methods. Like we write methods papers to talk about how we did, participatory community engaged research using methods like photo voice, right? Using Zoom-based research. And in that way, we kind of were able to meet requirements to publish without having to disclose results that communities aren't ready to release yet. So kind of writing, like publishing through, for example, the International Journal of Qualitative Methods, Qualitative Research, and other kind of more methods-oriented journals. So I'll just kind of end there.
That is perfect, perfect segue. Thank you for that. I'd like to thank you, panelists, and then we're gonna open this up for questions. What I love about what this last bit of conversation is that there are strategies that we can use depending on where we are in our career trajectories in order to make this work without abandoning both our values and our focus and our purpose in doing this scholarship. All right, we have just a few minutes. I think we're gonna do questions until about 5 after 1. I'm letting Sean know, and because he's keeping us on track for time. So we're gonna do questions for about another 10 minutes or so. And so questions and answers should be brief. But I want at least one from this room, and there might be 1 or 2 from the chat. So anybody in here have a question? Not to put you on the spot. Okay, I can start with the chat. Anybody? Okay, let's see. Any questions or comments? There was a question in the chat while folks get their thoughts together. It was basically from Mike Rogers, who asked, does it hurt or help the civic engagement research movement that civic engagement encompasses so many activities and so much can qualify as fitting under its umbrella? Does it need to be more of a defined domain of activities, or is it okay that political engagement, community engagement, volunteerism, on and on are included as civic engagement? So does it need to be more precise for us to own it and for political science to say, okay, we know what it is, or is this motley set of things acceptable? Any thoughts here from the panel?
I think it's good that it's kind of squishy because, for example, if civically engaged research were to become understood narrowly as something that is working with activist organizations to pursue equity, justice, inclusion, and belonging ideals, then we get labeled as woke and we all get canceled. But if it's a broader set of activities and it includes other things like working with election administrators to help train poll workers more effectively, then I feel like it's cushioned from those sorts of attacks. So I think it should be kind of vague.
Okay, all right. Anybody else on that? Thanks, Melissa. A defensive move.
I think the civic engagement section would say we're trying to be broad. We've got members who study any number of those things, right? Everything from volunteerism to civic pedagogy. To Melissa's point, there are some political reasons that it makes sense, but I think also because, I think to Rob's point earlier about the larger the body of work that's out there, the larger the number of people who locate themselves in doing this work, the more it becomes important to the discipline, right? So I would come down on the side of broad is okay, especially because to some extent we're currently defining ourselves, right? And defining what this work is. And I worry about what happens if we sort of disenfranchise people who ultimately we decide their work doesn't count as civically engaged research at a time when what we're trying to say is all of this work should count. So I think broad is good.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think broad is good, and I think I mean, political science is an extremely heterogeneous discipline. There are lots of us who do a lot of different kinds of things. You know, so think about people who study almost anything else. There are quantitative people, there are qualitative people, there are people who use this method or that method. And I don't see why, as a domain of things to study or of a way of studying the world, civically engaged research should be any different from the rest of the discipline. But I think, just back to the point I made earlier about rigor, I think we need to be careful that the work that we do that starts with civic engagement has to use methods and data and analytical approaches that are appropriate to the questions that you want to answer, and that can actually answer those questions. I think so. I'm agreeing with Lauren. Broad is good, and I think that actually can sort of help push the field forward as a rigorous arena in political science.
Right, and I'll add to that, just to say again, to really exhort and extol our cohort in this room and our previous cohorts, that's part of the work that we envision our ICER fellows doing, that we are in some ways suggesting, and those who are on the call as well. So thank you. We have over 75 people, or we've had 75 people on the Zoom call. But that the work that we're doing is really building out, creating an infrastructure. It should be contested and debated. We should be sorting these things out for the next decade, but we really do need to be defining, what is this? How does it create theory? What kinds of theories matter? What kinds of approaches? What is rigor? How do we define that? Like, those are the kinds of things that we should be pursuing.
I found this on the web. For what time is it theories matter? What kind of
Sorry for my Siri interruption. All right, here we are back again. All right, Val and Libby.
I'd like to ask our panelists to speak a little bit about how they address issues of transparency and replicability. Or is that the right word? Yeah. Because I mean, obviously, some of the potential harms that could occur is if you can't give away everything and be transparent because of the cooperation that you've had from community members who may not want this out. And then how do you replicate things when many types of CER research is so geographically bound? I mean, I guess you try to do multiple case studies, but obviously that becomes more expensive and cost prohibitive. So talk about transparency and how you replicate these studies, because in my definition of rigor, I would think those things come in.
Okay. And I'd like to add to that kind of limitations, but also, what we are, what the strengths are as well. But yeah, anybody want to kind of jump in on replication and what was the first one? Transparency.
Well, I think replication, obviously the replication crisis is an issue, but it is also, I'm not getting this out very clearly. If you're asking people to always replicate, to always do multiple things, then it does become cost prohibitive. And then people like me, people like Lauren, who are at small colleges without a lot of institutional support, then scholars at our institution basically can't compete with folks who are at Berkeley or Johns Hopkins. Sorry to pick on you, but who are going to get have a lot of money to do their research, and then, well, that's not fair, right? And often the folks who are doing civically engaged research with historically marginalized communities are at schools without a lot of institutional support. So I don't want to say that the answer is that you always have to do multiple studies in multiple locations, but I think as long as you are acknowledging in your articles or in your books, here are the limitations of what we found, given that we did this in this geographic location at this point in time, that doesn't mean it's not rigorous work, right? As long as it's based in theory, as long as it's embedded in existing scholarship and is not overstating its findings. I think that sort of transparency in terms of acknowledging the limitations of your data are enough.
Good. I want to add to that. The kinds of things that Brooke Ackerley talked about yesterday was really being precise in how you did the work and the decision points. She called it accountability. I don't know if it was ethical accountability, but there was a kind of language for being very clear about how you did the work, why you made the decisions that you did, and sharing that as a kind of clarity, really unearthing the kinds of things that we often may not, right? And so I think that could be part of it. This conversation has also made me think that maybe for us, because sometimes we get caught, oh, it's just a case study, but it might be that we need to think differently about how to connect one individual's work with another individual's work. That, we already do that in the sciences, but being much more explicit about tying it to these other people's work and how that improves whatever generalizability or whatever kinds of things, replicability, whatever these kinds of things are that we're trying to do. We should be inventive there. And we should borrow from other disciplines. We're not, these kinds of issues are not unique to us as a discipline or to only our questions. And so I think we need to kind of shift how we know what we know, what replication, how replication can work doing this kind of an analysis and using these kinds of approaches. So I appreciate what you said, Melissa. It has me thinking, but I don't have answers yet. Okay. Did anybody else want to address that question?
Yeah, I would like to.
Okay,
So for the transparency is a huge value in our asylum seeker group. We made one of our group norms is we want the asylum seekers to know whenever we talk about them in research presentations, grant proposals, as well as any sort of public facing interviews. And so we've made a commitment with a lot of resources for interpreters and translators to make sure that these are accessible to our group. So this means just translating conference papers into Spanish, also doing sort of audiobooks of presentations and having them listen to presentations that I give at like Midwest or APSA, so that they can listen to how they're being talked about. With regards to how the consent piece, we always want to make sure that we ask for permission in terms of what grants to proceed with, as well as giving them an out of participating in any sorts of public-facing opportunities. And so, the decision to share someone's traumatic story or to publicly participate weighs heavily on an asylum seeker, since prosecutors are actively looking for any kind of information to undermine their asylum case. And so we want to make sure that we give all sorts of information to understand what they might be confronting. In terms of replicability, we are going to find out this year. So thanks to a generous grant from the Henry Luce Foundation, we were able to test, we don't really call it replication, but we're trying out our mutual support framework in 2 other areas. Actually, both of them are in Massachusetts. And so we are, in the spirit of fuzziness, there are no very strict rules about how to implement our mutual support framework. In supporting the other work in different hubs, we more think of it as like mutual research in terms of supporting them and answering questions that they may face. And so we give a little more flexibility to innovation, as well as how do they address the specific needs and interests of asylum seekers in different and new contexts that are very different from St. Louis. So hopefully I'll have more to share in future work.
Awesome. Yes, absolutely.
Can I just say a real quick point about transparency? Because I actually asked a journal editor this question. I do a lot of elite interviewing where I promise confidentiality in my own work. And, you know, with all of the requirements of providing all of your data and, you know, pre-registration and things like that, I said to this editor, what do? I can't give you this information. And the submission sites require me to provide files and things like that. And his response was, have a conversation with the journal editor. Because I was posing it as a hypothetical. It was a presentation at the Southern meeting about kind of new journal standards. And he said, you know, have a conversation with the editor, explain the situation. He said, at least in his case, they would never insist on, you know, naming folks or sharing information in violation of agreements that have been made with those individuals. So I know that I sometimes find it a deterrent thinking about submitting an article for publication where it's like, I can't provide these files, or, you know, the submission site, because now everybody is just, you know, you use the electronic site. It's not useful in that way. And he indicated, you know, reach out to the editor and ask the question in advance. So if anybody is deterred by that, I would just recommend trying that as a first step.
Hey, all right. Any pressing questions? All right, I'm keeping my eye on the time. Oh, Libby.
Yeah.
Let me give a warning. 1 second. Libby is gonna ask our last question. And then panelists, I'm coming to you for like a 1-minute wrap up. Like, what do you, if you never get a chance to have this conversation again, what do you want to say today before we go? All right, Libby.
Hi, everybody. I'm Libby Sherrow, off camera, ICER fellow at UMass Amherst. My question is sort of in the spirit of wrapping this up, especially for folks who've been ICER fellows in the past. What's the advice that you would give to us who've just gone through this, I think, transformative 4-day experience to really cement it, to internalize what we've learned and to plan for the next steps? And I want to think about like the next week, the next month, and the next year.
Let's go.
Well done. We have such a brilliant cohort. My goodness, it's better and better. All right. Thoughts from the panel, and that would be Adriano. I think he's the only fellow on the panel. Is Adriano still? Oh, you know, you're not at my bottom list. I'm like, where are you? But I see your face. Okay, yes, but others might want to chime in too.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think the big joke in the inaugural cohort was we kept on saying, like, if we only knew a high-profile editor at a high-profile journal that's part of the ICER institution, if we only knew someone that we could talk to.
PGI, right? Yeah, no.
Yeah, right.
APSA.
Those people are totally unapproachable. They'll never like even answer your email.
Agreed. They never laugh. They never want to help you. But you know, through Valeria, through Peter, through the guests that came through ICER, I think what I recommend is to leverage your contacts and your you know, personal as well as professional networks to try to get a foothold in starting a conversation that invites your fellow members of your cohort to talk about these things that you've been talking about all week. Because I think, if I'm willing to bet, there's a lot of energy and a lot of knowledge and expertise, both lived as well as experienced, in that room. And I think it should be documented and offered for other political scientists who are interested in this work. And so in terms of the 1 year, 5 year, 10-year project, I think there's a lot that you can do as a cohort. And there's more that you can do with the other cohorts of ICER who are also interested in connecting. So those are my 2 cents. So hopefully I'll hear from you, and then we can meet.
Absolutely.
Ginormous transformer at some later date.
That's almost exactly what I was going to. That's almost exactly what I was going to say as a non-ICER participant. Is you guys in the room now should be doing what the first cohort did. I mean, Adriano, I know Doug Hess is on the call, and maybe others of you in the webinar. But you guys, the first cohort, really took this up, this sort of community building, networking, pushing out the lessons that you collectively learned and taught each other in the room, pushing them out to the broader community, the PS forum. I know you've been very active. So I think one of the, as I said before, one of the values of this over the years is not just each individual cohort, but now, Valeria, this is the fourth
because
cohort?
Is it fourth or
Right,
fifth
right.
because of COVID? Four. Yeah, so that's right around
So
80.
that's 80 people roughly, who are part of this group, plus, you know, the hangers on, those of us who have been through and various
And plus the many that are on this call too, and also in the section, so yeah.
So I think the, you know, not just take the lessons, internalize them and make your work better, and do the great work that you're going to do, but do it as part of a community and build a community. That's what's going to really make this sort of sing in political science.
Awesome. And Ethel.
So I'm going to quote Hamilton here. I think you've got to be in the room where it happens, right? And I see that there is now critical mass of engaged scholars. And I think focus your energies on interventions which actually matter. And I'll cite a small example. The Canadian Journal of Political Science was, you know, a lot of Indigenous thinkers were angry because it was almost going to publish a special issue on Indigenous politics without Indigenous scholars, right? So there was an intervention there where Indigenous political scientists basically said that's not cool, right? And so what some of us did, because I knew that there was going to be a new call for editors for CJPS, I made sure I was in the selection committee and I helped write the call. Right. So this is kind of a call for all of you to be alert to opportunities such as call for editors, call for special issue proposals, and create community and band together and figure out, hey, is it really beyond the pale for us to imagine being editors for the Journal of Politics? Right? Like, because I think as someone who got tenure like 2 years ago, I relied on letters from decision makers, from people with power to get my file through. And one crucial way for us to get our work across is to be part of these editorial boards, to be part of these editorial teams where methods and approaches that are, you know, more critical in political science are actually accepted. So yeah, to quote Hamilton, we all got to be in the room where it happens. And let's harness our energies, our collective strengths to try to intervene in these moments.
Love it, love it. And I'm sure this will feed into our conversations later on. There will be some prototyping time later on this afternoon. I'm gonna make those our last words, but I want to leave room for who hasn't spoken, maybe Lauren and Melissa. At least, and then I'll say, if time permits, I'll say a couple things. But Lauren, have you already spoken?
No. I was just gonna say, like, no, you don't need to hear from me on this. I think Ethel and Adriano are the right voices for that. So yeah.
Okay. Any final words as we kind of sign off from you all that you want to say to the cohort or to the group also on the webinar, or to the audience that might watch this into perpetuity? Any final words?
I want to say that I hope you all go do civically engaged research, and maybe this is dangerous to say this to such a large group of webinar participants, but if you want to ask me questions about it, because I have done a lot of it, you know how to find me on the interwebs. So just let me know, and I'm happy to give you some time and talk to you.
All right, thank you. Anyone else? Last comment.
I'll just say that the civic engagement section is always looking for people to get involved, and we have a couple of open leadership positions right now that we'll elect in at the APSA annual meeting. So if you're interested in learning more about that, please reach out. I'm happy to connect you, tell you more about the section, and get you involved.
Wonderful. 30
Valeria,
seconds.
Is there one more? Can I ask
Yeah.
one more thing?
Everybody has 30 seconds. Yes. Okay.
If this cohort is interested in building those connections between ICER cohorts, the Centennial Center has offered the first inaugural cohort a special grants fund that aims to build connections between cohorts. If you're interested in trying to do this for your cohort, please reach out to me, and we'll plan to do something that hopefully it brings us together and have more awesome conversations.
Yes.
All right, last 30-second word. Anybody? Okay. All right, Sean, cannot believe that we're almost on time. And any words from Peter or from Sean right now?
Thank you. Thank you, Valeria.
Okay, yeah.
Real quick, just to give a plug.
Okay, so as I'm gonna step off, but I just want to say thank you, everybody, for this amazing conversation. Thank you, panelists, for joining. And there was one more thing I wanted to say, but I have now forgotten it. So again, thank you, and we will follow up definitely. I'm gonna let Sean take the stage.
Yeah, well, thank you all for coming. I just want to make a brief plug from APSA. My name's Sean Delahanty, by the way. I'm the director of the Centennial Center at APSA. So the ICER, as well as many of our grant programs, run through the Centennial Center. And I just want to invite everyone who participated in this, who's watched, who may watch in the future, to please be a part of ICER in some way or another. We're always looking for more applicants. We usually start accepting applications sometime in January or February. We're also looking for friends of ICER, champions of ICER, people who want to partner with us, people who want to present with us, people who want to make their resources available to our cohorts. We're looking for support and help all the way from the big level picture of strategic thinking and development, all the way down to people who want to meet our cohorts and talk to our people. So you can get in touch with us if you email centennial@apsanet.org. We'll see your email. You can also find us on the web if you just look for our website, APSA Centennial Center. We have a special microsite for ICER as well that you can click through there. So please do stay involved, stay engaged with us in one way or another, and we would love to have you, as I said, as a participant, as a friend, as a guest, whichever way you want to participate, we'd love to have you. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you all. Wonderful, good job.